suspicion to outright disbelief. Accusations of the Syrian government using chemical weapons against the militants has been rejected time and again by the Syrian government, with the more likely scenario to be the militants to have used chemical weapons to pave the way for military intervention. In this debate, we'll look at this closely and see why the U.S. has taken this to another level by accusing the Syrian government of the anticipated use of chemical weapons.
Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal al-Muqdad held a press conference in Damascus on Monday to dismiss accusations that the government used sarin gas on the militant-held town of Khan Sheikhoun in April. Muqdad revealed that inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons refused government invitations to visit the site of the attack or the military airport allegedly linked to it.
3 days ago, we received letters from head of the F.T.W saying they will not be able to reach Khan Sheikhoun and that they don't have clearance. And here they mean from Western countries and the US to visit Al-Sharad airport. I believe the airport will expose the main goals of the US and will reveal that it was not used for storing chemical weapons.
Muqdad described US strikes on the Shu'airat airbase in response to alleged chemical attacks as unjustified and called the Trump administration insane. He warned against the consequences of a possible new attack on Syrian government targets. Muqdad said Damascus and its allies would respond to any new aggression. He said the US and Western countries accused the Syrian government of using chemical weapons to justify their ties with terrorists.
How can the United States, Saudi Arabia, Britain, France justify their relationship with these terrorist groups when these terrorist groups use chemical weapons in Syria? They cannot. So they have to support any allegation made by these organizations to protect themselves and the West and to justify their relationship with these organizations.
Muqdad said that terrorists smuggled chemical substances into Syria from Iraq. He said the terrorists even tried to bring them illegally from Turkey, a country Muqdad claimed encourages terrorists to use chemical weapons. He warned Syria's enemies of grave consequences should they launch any further attacks on Syria. Al-Muqdad stressed that the Syrian government does not own any chemical weapon, promising any further attack on the Syrian government under the pretext that it used chemical weapons will not be accepted. Hamad Ali, Press TV, Damascus.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, we have Richard Millett, journalist and political commentator who joins us from London. Also from San Francisco, we have Richard Becker. He is from the Answer Coalition. I'd like to welcome you both. And Richard Millett, let me first start with you. We've heard the U.S. accusations in particular, combined with the Western accusations as a whole, against the Syrian government using chemical weapons. We could mention the Ghouta massacre. We could talk about Khan Sheikhoun. But has the U.S. provided evidence?
Well, I think its recent report has claimed that Syria, well, if you put two and two together, it's obvious that only the murderer Assad, who's been butchering his own people for the last 5 years, who now has become so bloodthirsty that nothing's beyond his intention, his capability, his sick-mindedness. The Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons came out with a report saying that sarin gas was used at Khan Sheikhoun, and even Assad has confirmed that his warplanes were operating in the area. So the fact that there was nerve gas and the only way that that could be dropped was from the air, and the only person who was operating warplanes at the time was, on his own admission, was Assad, then Assad is the murderer of his own people via chemical weapons. It's beyond any doubt. And the 99.9% of the international community, except Iran and the few extremists in America that we're obviously going to hear from any moment, those are the only people who are supporting this kind of sick brutality. And that's tragic.
Richard Becker, Richard Millett does not talk about the incidents involving chemical weapons that occur without the Syrian government at all being in that picture. Yet we get no response from the international community, in particular from the U.S., who seems to pick and choose incidents of chemical weapons. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that Mr. Millet's characterizations are really kind of raving about the Assad government. And it's very clear, I think it should be very clear to anyone who thinks logically, that it made absolutely no sense for the Assad government to have dropped chemical weapons on this small town in Syria. And in fact, the flight, in interest of deconfliction, the flight was known to the U.S. authorities, Russian authorities, and Syrian authorities. All knew about this flight. It was a bombing that took place. There's no question about that. But there's also no evidence, real evidence, that it was sarin gas. It may have been other forms of chemical results of the bombing that took place, because there was supposedly storage of insecticides, pesticides, fertilizers inside that building. So there may have been that happened. But he discounts, your other guest discounts the fact that such respected journalists as Uri Avneri, Seymour Hersh, and also Scott Ritter, who was a chemical weapons inspector, that was his job, have all debunked the idea that this made any sense at all, that there was any evidence to confirm this. And so the reality of this situation, of what has come out, is not evidence. It's not a real investigation. Uri Avneri, the Israeli journalist, pointed out that he was an investigative journalist for many, many years and never would have approved a story like this based on the so-called evidence and really the lack of evidence. So there's pretty widespread debunking of the idea that the Syrian government carried out a chemical attack. And of course, you have to ask the question, why would they possibly do it when, to carry this out, knowing that the consequences for a real chemical attack could have been really catastrophic for Syria?
Well, Richard Miller, do you support any of the investigative journalists that Richard Becker mentioned there? Do you agree with any of them, or do you think that they are all fabricating their stories or lying?
Well, it's quite incredible, isn't it, really, when you look at an organisation for the prevention of chemical weapons, an organisation that is set up for this exact reason, to take witness evidence, to get in on the ground, to test what's happened on the ground, to interview witnesses on the ground.
They never went to the site of the so-called attack. They never went to the site of the attack. They never went there. Why didn't they go?
Well, they've
never set foot in
interviewed
their town.
witnesses they've interviewed witnesses, however they did it, Mr. Becker. They interviewed witnesses who were there on the ground. You're in your little studio in America.
In Turkey.
You're far away.
In Turkey.
Sorry? Okay,
They
in
interviewed
Turkey,
them in Turkey.
you're completely... Okay, well, wherever they are, you certainly aren't there. You're thousands of miles away in your
Well,
little
you're not there
comfortable
either.
studio.
You're not there either.
I know.
That's not the
but
point
you're
about
one
who's
who-
there. You're not there. But
Okay.
how could the organization
What?
for the prohibition of chemical weapons make a report without ever going to the site?
That's a good question, Richard Miller. Go ahead.
Well, however they did it, they interviewed witnesses, and they were the witnesses who were actually there, who actually saw what took place. You're citing journalists. I mean, journalists who certainly are even more removed from people who were actually there. Whether this organisation interviewed them actually at the site or not at the site, they were interviewing people who had direct evidence of what happened. They saw the airplanes, they saw the warplanes, they saw what was dropped from the warplanes, they saw the immediate aftermath of what had been dropped from the warplanes. So, Mr. Becker, you're a war crime. This is a tantamount to war crimes denial of a sick kind. When an organisation set up, devoted to this actual precise investigation, its outcomes, its results have been denied by you, who favours the far removed ideology, propaganda, evidence of journalists.
Richard Becker.
Well, I think that the key phrase there was however they carried it out. It does actually matter how they carried out the investigation. It's kind of laughable to use a phrase like that, however they carried it out. In fact, they carried out it. They're a political organization also. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, like all organizations of that type, all international organizations, is political, and someone is using their influence inside of it to come to a conclusion for which there is actual evidence that the government of Syria carried out a sarin attack, gas attack, on that town. There is no evidence of that, actual evidence. And there's something very important about whether or not the people are interviewed in Turkey or in Syria or in the village. And I believe it's called the chain of custody, which is a very important element in investigations about who has the evidence and who has the evidence been passed to and who have they passed it to. And I don't think that there's any reliable information about that at all. So I think that I think we have to go back to the cui bono question. Who benefits? Who benefits from this? It was not the Syrian government by any means that would benefit from carrying out a chemical weapons attack. They were met with 59 cruise missiles launched by the United States that hit a base, the United States said, and killed at least 9 people in that attack. And of course, we have to remember that that was very symbolic. It was very much what the government wanted to do, that Trump wanted to do, because Trump was eating dinner, having dessert with Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, and wanted to make a point to Xi Jinping. So during dessert announces, oh, we've just launched this strike. And then the United States says, well, we think another strike is going to happen, chemical weapons strike last week, and then nothing happened, so then they claim they prevented a chemical weapons strike. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
We're going to get to some of those points, but first we're going to take a listen to some of the viewer comments that were posted on the Facebook page. We'll be coming right back to the debate.
Scary, they won't let the chemical weapons fairy tale die. I guess it's the last fake argument they have left. Only problem is it makes no sense at all for Assad to do this. The US can fake anything in the world, just like the way they did in Iraq. Assad's regime claimed many innocent lives, dropped mother-of-all bombs on Assad's head. They're looking for plausible grounds to attack the Syrian army and their allies and reserve the victories of Russia and its allies. Their puppets have failed in that. It may be fake like previous ones, but please seek the solution of conflict for sake of innocent Syrian Muslims.
Okay, some of the viewer comments there. So let's see here. Let's get to some of the evidence, Richard Millett, and really just so if there's maybe a hint of any doubts that it may incur inside your perspective, I'm going to mention one to start off with, and that's the former chief prosecutor of the United Nations, who I guess served on a UN commission looking into human rights abuses in Syria, and also a war crimes prosecutor. That's Carla Del Ponte. She said during the chemical attack on Ghouta, I was a little bit stupefied by the first indication of the use of nerve gas by the opposition, and this is not the first time, she called them, rebel forces in Syria have come under suspicion for using chemical weapons. I mean, this was made, of course, back in 2014. Doesn't that make you think, well, maybe there's a chance that these so-called rebels, who many are Al-Qaeda terrorists, perhaps there's a chance that they may have executed that? Go ahead, Richard Millett.
How do they execute it? They haven't got warplanes. Assad admits he was operating warplanes in Khan Shaykhun, over Khan Shaykhun at the time. How is anyone else going to drop chemical weapons except for the use of warplanes? Assad is operating over these towns, these cities, constantly. He's the only one who has the capability. He admits he was in Khan Shaykhun operating warplanes at the time.
Yes,
and this
that's
idea
right.
of who wins.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so
Mr. Becker's stupid ideology that it doesn't benefit Assad. Of course it benefits Assad. He's killing his own people and killing them in a more brutal way. Terrifies them to give up even more. His father was equally brutal. His father killed up to 50,000 people in Hama. in 1982. This is a sick mentality of the Assad family. They don't care how they do it. They just want to put fear into their own people to give up and to die if that's necessary. Either give up or die. This family should be swept out of Syria and let the Syrian people have democratic elections and put an end to this nonsense and this sick support from Tehran and from the extremists in America that we're hearing on your show at the moment.
Richard Becker.
Well, that's kind of more the raving pseudo-psychoanalysis of the Assad family. And it's really just fits in with the agenda of the British, French, U.S., Turkish, Saudi governments who have all been working together to overthrow the government. And the idea that you can sit in London and say who the leaders of Syria should be, maybe that's a leftover sentiment from the days when the sun never set on the British Empire. But that's not reality in today's world. The people of Syria have a right to determine their leadership, their government. And I think that it's pretty clear that a very large part of the population, not everyone, a very large part of the population supports the Assad government, the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party government, as when they are confronted with the alternative being ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda under a new name. They don't want that. I have been in Syria myself. I know that this is not what the great majority of Syrian people who are a multi-ethnic and multi-religious country, that they don't want to live under the reign of terror of those kind of organizations. And I think clearly prefer that government. So you can sit in London and prescribe who the government should be of Syria, but that's not going to get you anywhere.
Well, talk about Khan Sheikhoun. I think that, well, let me ask you this, Richard Miller. You know, the U.S. has come out recently saying that the Syrian government is planning, they haven't even done anything, they're planning this alleged chemical attack. So this is where it gets a little confusing and takes the whole scenario to another level. Is the U.S. trying to accuse the Syrian government of an action that has not happened, and for that now to be a pretext of military intervention in Syria? Is that what the U.S. is doing? For something that hasn't happened
It's
yet?
very possible. It's very possible. It's almost sensible that if this regime has a history of murdering its own people, either using conventional weapons, which is equally horrific, or chemical weapons, which is puts even more fear into his own people, into Assad's own people. Then, and if they have evidence that there's a possibility, then yes, I mean, maybe they want to stop a third chemical attack from Assad on his own people. And it's laughable of Mr. Becker to claim, that they'd rather have Assad instead of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, of course, but to an extent, you know, the choice of many Syrian people is, do they die at the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or do they die at the hands of Assad? And that's the choice that extremist ideology like Mr. Becker's, sitting in the comfort of his own studio in America, whilst these people have to take a choice whether they die at the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS or Assad. That's a choice that they make when Mr. Becker sits and goes off and has a pleasant evening wherever he is. This is a world of extremist ideology where these people in Syria who've suffered for 5 years get a choice from extremists as well who they die, by the chemical weapons of Assad or the guns and knives of ISIS. It's laughable.
Well, you talk about laughable and you talk about extremist ideology, but Richard Becker, isn't the U.S. characterized by just those two terminologies? Because they're convicting of an action that hasn't happened, and then they say that because of our warning, the Syrian government took it seriously. That's almost laughable. At the same time, this past month, the U.S. has been accused of killing more than 300 civilians in Iraq. You don't hear much about that in terms of Richard Millet's statements coming out there.
And they've killed hundreds. They and the Saudi Arabia and the U.S. supplying the bombs and the planes in Yemen as well. Hundreds, thousands of people have died. You know, what is really an extremist ideology is the idea of American exceptionalism or British exceptionalism, that somehow these countries rise above all others in the world, and, you know, they stand taller, they see further, and everything they do is for the good of humanity. While any country that's being targeted by the U.S. or by Britain or by the U.S. and Britain together, like Iraq, where they killed hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people, that's all left off the hook because they really meant well, according to Mr. Millett's idea of things. And so that's an extremist ideology, I would say, one that justifies war after war after war after war against countries that are trying to go to try to have an independent course, trying to develop, trying to emerge from centuries of colonialism and build a future for themselves and their people where their resources are used for them for the benefit of their own people. And, you know, to say this and to take this position about the U.S. and Britain is unacceptable.
Okay,
Richard
Millett, hold on.
Unacceptable extremist ideology.
Let's give 30 seconds to Richard Millett. I believe you have something to say. We'll come back to you in ending. Richard Becker with 30 seconds to you. Richard Millett, go ahead.
Well, in a way, I'm pleased to hear this lunacy, this idiotic answers from Mr. Becker. He has no responses. He has no answers, really. He goes back to attacking America and Britain for its colonial era and supremacy, blah, blah, blah. This is the kind of... He's come to the end of his minimum answers.
Okay, that was 30 seconds.
It highlights
Richard Becker,
the
go ahead.
idiocy. It highlights...
An answer to Richard Millett. I'm sorry, Richard Millett. Richard Becker, go ahead.
The U.S. and Britain, this is not ancient history. The U.S. and Britain, under completely falsified pretenses, not mistaken intelligence, invaded Iraq together, tore their country apart. It's not one country anymore. They've done the same in Syria. They've done the same in Libya. They've done the same in Yemen. We're not talking about ancient history. We're talking about modern imperialism, contemporary imperialism.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Richard Becker from the Answer Coalition, and thank you, Richard Millett.